I want to begin a conversation that I think will help us become a more just, peaceful, and prosperous society. Now, that may sound odd because in today's society, the idea of moving towards justice and moving towards peace seem to be incompatible. But I think that's because there is one thing that we need to learn to see that we do not see, and there is one thing that we need to get in the habit of doing that we are not in the habit of doing. Hi everybody, I'm Greg from Heart Tools, where we make it simple to build great relationships. And it's no secret that our civic relationships can be very strained these days. So I wanted to do a video where we take some of the relational principles that we use in Heart Tools and apply them towards creating a society that is more just, peaceful, and prosperous. When Martin Luther King Jr. led the Montgomery bus boycotts, there was a very specific goal to that protest: change the policies so that black people could sit wherever they want on the bus. When Gandhi led the Salt March protest, there was also a very specific goal: overturn these unjust taxes. Now compare that to what happened after the death of George Floyd, when protests broke out not only in the United States but all across the globe, many of which became riots with the stated goal, or perhaps rallying cry would be a better term, of defunding the police. Now here's the question: why move from this specific local achievable goals of the earlier protests to this more broad, generalized, and even undefined goal? Because we were told quite often, we really don't mean defund the police. We just mean let's be more strict about the budgeting and how much money and what they're tasked to do. And then we were told quite often on the other side, no, when we say defund, we mean defund. So why move from one kind of goal to the other? And if we're going to have a more broad, generalized goal, why not have something like, let's ensure this generation of black children become the most wildly successful generation in the history of the planet, and take whatever metric you have, relationally, financially, educationally, let's make sure they're the most successful. So why become more broad, and why this goal? And the reason for the switch in the kind of goals is because there is a second kind of bully operating in our culture that we have not learned to recognize. We've learned to recognize the first kind of bully that says, black people have to sit on the back of the bus, or Jews cannot stay at this hotel, or women cannot have executive positions in this corporation. We can spot that bully a mile off, but there's another kind of bully that we have not learned to see. And this second kind of bully I call the rescuer bully, because they pretend to take up the mantle of a Martin Luther King Jr. or a Gandhi, when actually what they're doing is using justice issues to make themselves rich and famous and influential, while at the same time making the world a much less just, much less peaceful, and much less prosperous society. And there is an easy way to tell if someone is like Martin Luther King Jr. or Gandhi, functioning in the role of what we might call a moral prophet who is calling society to be more just, or if someone is functioning in the rescuer bully role. And it is this: the language of the moral prophet is guilt, and the language of the rescuer bully is shame. Guilt says you're doing something wrong. Shame says you are something wrong. So the language of the moral prophet is guilt. You're doing something unjust. Stop doing the unjust thing, and I will no longer have a problem with you. And this, by the way, is why someone like Martin Luther King could spend so much of his time campaigning for justice and still love the people that he was protesting against. Because if someone is guilty, you can still love them while you're calling them to stop doing the unjust thing. That's how guilt functions, but it's not how shame functions. If you are doing something wrong, you can change what you're doing. But if you are something wrong, there's nothing you can change because that's who you are. And so if the problem with this group over here is not that they're doing sexist things and they need to stop, if the problem is they are sexist to the core, then you can't love them, you have to hate them. And if the problem with your country is not that it is doing racist things or it has done racist things in the past, if the problem with your country is it is inherently racist, you cannot love your country. You have to hate it because loving it would be the same thing as loving racism because that's what it is. And rescuer bullies not only create an environment of hate towards the people that they say ought to be shamed, unlike moral prophets, rescuer bullies end up actually making things worse for the people they claim to be helping. And to understand how this is so, we need to grasp a fundamental truth about the way life works and the way life doesn't work. The way life works is we are presented with a constant stream of problems that we need to solve and overcome. And it starts very early. We need to learn how to walk, and we need to learn how to talk and feed ourselves. And then later on, we need to learn how to make our bed and clean our room, and we need to learn how to set an alarm clock and get ourselves up in the morning. We need to learn how to read and do math. We need to learn how to balance a checking account. And each time we solve a problem, two things happen. The first is the problem stays solved. I don't have to learn how to do that again. I've become competent in that. And the second thing that happens is each time we overcome a problem, we've developed a greater capacity to thrive and succeed in life and be strong, interdependent, independent people. And so life is just this series of being faced with problems that we master, overcome, and constantly live at a higher and higher level. And then one day something happens and we're confronted with something that's different from a problem. We are presented with a crisis. Perhaps a tornado destroys our house, or we're in a car accident. There's something that happens that I cannot overcome on my own, and I need a community around me to help me get through this crisis so that I can get back on the stairway and get to the point where I'm solving my own problems again and becoming a strong, interdependent, independent human being. So we need help in a crisis, but we need to solve and own our own problems. That's the way life works. And here's the way life doesn't work. Life doesn't work when we try to help other people by taking away their problems or taking away the consequences of the fact that they are not solving their own problems. Now, we sometimes think we're helping because problems are painful and suffering consequences for not solving our problems can be painful, but taking away pain is not helping. People need their problems because problems are not the obstacle to success in life. Problems are actually the stepping stone to success in life. And when we take away problems, we create a triangle where we become the rescuer from the problem, and the person that we're rescuing becomes dependent on us to continue to solve that problem for them. And we set up a reality where we are the powerful person because we know how to do laundry and we know how to cook. We know how to set an alarm and get ourselves up in the morning. We know how to do all the things that a strong, powerful adult needs to do. And the dependent person becomes the powerless person because they are not able to do these things for themselves. And the only way out of the triangle is for the dependent person to finally solve their own problems and get back on the stairway. It's important to understand the stairway and the triangle because that will help us avoid a manipulative ploy that the rescuer bully uses around two important concepts: equity and systemic injustice. And they do this through the assumption that if we see inequity on the stairway, that certain groups are getting higher than other groups in an area, it's for one of two reasons. It's either because there is a crisis of injustice on the stairway that is preventing people from climbing, or it's because the stairway itself is systemically unjust. There's some hidden, invisible system at work keeping people down on the stairway. And what is ignored is the possibility that the problem may not be on the stairway. The problem may be in the triangle. The problem may be that some rescuers have created a situation where a group of people do not have to take responsibility for solving problems that every person has to solve in order to become stronger and move up the stairway. Or rescuers have created a situation where a group of people don't have to suffer the consequences of not having solved those problems. Let's look at a specific example of this. Reading proficiency and math proficiency are problems on the stairway that must be solved if someone wants to climb up the stairway and eventually become an architect or a scientist or a doctor or an accountant or an engineer. Now here's our problem. In the United States, black students are significantly behind white students and Asian students when it comes to reading and math proficiency. In fact, among black high school seniors, less than 17% are proficient in reading, and only 6% are proficient in math. Now add to that the statistic that Asian students average about 2 hours of homework a night, white students average about 1 hour of homework a night, and black students average around 30 minutes of homework a night. Now, there are two ways to attack this problem. One way is to say, let us focus in and ensure that our black students are learning how to read and do math proficiently so that they can continue to climb the stairway on their own. The other way to attack this problem is to say that somehow the stairway is systemically unjust, and so what we need to do is we need to challenge college entrance requirements so that black students can get in with significantly less reading and math scores than white students and Asian students. Then we can pat ourselves on the back because we created equity in the universities, because now the percentages look more like we want them to look, even though we have put black students in an environment where they can't compete with their fellow students because their test scores are significantly lower, where they're much more likely to change to a less challenging degree program than the one they dreamed of, and where they're more likely to drop out of school. And it's time to recognize that that's just not good enough. That's not what we want. What we want is a society where if a black student enters a college or a university with the dream and the talent to become an architect, they become an architect. Or if they enter with the dream and talent to become a biochemist, then that's what happens. Or if they have the dream and the talent to become an engineer, they become an outstanding engineer. What we want is to unleash the talent and potential of our black students so that more of them become entrepreneurs who create billion-dollar companies that provide amazing services and products that all of our children and grandchildren can enjoy, so that more of them become scientists who create technological and medical breakthroughs that benefit all of humanity, or so that more of them become surgeons or cardiologists or family doctors. And by the way, if you're thinking, well, you got to start somewhere, at least it's a first step. It's not a first step, not if you're putting students in a triangle, because the victim role in the rescuer triangle is where potential goes to die. And remember, the way the triangle works is not, hey, here's a group of people who can't succeed, so let's rescue them. The way the triangle works is, hey, let's rescue these people from their pain. And when you do that, you rob them of the challenges that they need to succeed. Because I'm not aware of any study that suggests that black children are innately less intelligent than whites or Hispanics or Asians, and they're not able to learn to read and do math. On the other hand, I'm not aware of any study that suggests it's possible for anyone to not become proficient in reading and math and become an architect or a doctor or an engineer. And by the way, that's why I talk about creating a just, peaceful, and prosperous society, because when we create a triangle like this for a whole group of people, we create a dependent class out of people who are perfectly capable of thriving and making amazing contributions to society. So rescuer bullies create a triangle where they are rescuing dependent victims from people that they've identified as villain. And to understand why I call these rescuers rescuer bullies, let's take a look at their playbook, because understanding their playbook will help us spot rescuer bullies whenever they appear. There are 4 main steps in the rescuer bully's playbook, and the first step is to attack and bully the person that you've identified as the villain. Now remember, rescuer bullies are different from moral prophets, and the moral prophets say, you are doing this wrong thing. Stop doing this wrong thing and we will no longer have a problem with you. Rescuer bullies don't do that. Rescuer bullies use shame, and they don't mention the wrong thing that you have to stop doing. So how do they attack the villain? One of the ways they do this is by calling into question the motives of the people they've identified as the villain. And it can be very effective, because anything can sound nefarious, even if it's something good and beneficial to society and something that everyone wants to see happen. It can sound nefarious if you say it's being done with a racist motive, or done with a sexist motive, or they're really just doing it because they're greedy. So you start with the assumption that this person is obviously monstrous, and then you work backwards to the motive for their behavior. And so if a man opens a door for a woman, he's not being polite, he is asserting his patriarchal dominance. Or if a white woman smiles at a black woman, she's not being friendly, she is trying to deny her white supremacy and her white privilege. And so what rescuer bullies have done is trained the dependent victims to question the motives of anything done by the people who they've identified as the villains, even behaviors which have always been thought of as kind and good and even noble are questioned. And it is a terribly twisted and destructive posture to take towards fellow human beings. The second way that rescuer bullies bully the people they've identified as villains is to hold them responsible for the emotional reactions that other people have to them. And the insinuation is, if this group of people is feeling this scared or this angry or this unsafe, something terribly traumatizing and unjust must be happening. And that's just not the case. Now, at Heart Tools, we talk a lot about emotions. And while I think emotions always say something worth paying attention to, that doesn't mean they always say something true about the outside world. Sometimes emotions say something true about your inside world, that perhaps you have wounds that haven't been healed, or that you have mistaken beliefs about reality. And that's why at Heart Tools we teach, you are responsible for your behavior. You're not responsible for other people's reaction to your behavior. And so if you do something wrong, take responsibility for that and not other people's feelings. And if you haven't done something wrong, there's nothing for you to take responsibility for. Otherwise, you're going to live in a reality where the most emotionally unstable people are in charge. The third thing that rescuer bullies do, since they are not calling out unjust behavior in the people that they identify as villains, is they demonize them with labels. And there is a whole host of labels that are used to bully people into silence without actually calling into question the specifics of what they're saying or what they're doing. Some of these labels are things like anti-science. Just say someone is anti-science, and then you don't have to actually deal with what is the scientific merit of the argument they're making. You can skip over that. Someone is a conspiracy theorist. Someone is patriarchal, or they're a colonizer. Someone's a racist or a sexist or a white supremacist. You can use those labels and not have to say, this is the racist thing this person is doing. This is the thing this person is doing that makes them a white supremacist or a sexist. So the first step in the rescuer bully's playbook is to silence the people you've identified as the villain by attacking their motives, making them responsible for others' emotional reactions, and demonizing them with labels. And the second step is to infantilize the dependent victims by taking away problems that people need to struggle with in order to grow and become strong and independent. And they do this by taking a problem that's always been considered a problem that if you want to grow up and be a functioning, thriving adult, you have to learn how to overcome this problem. So they take a problem like that and they give it a new name to make it sound like a crisis. One of those new terms is microaggression. Now you hear that word and it sounds like a crisis, right? But here's an example of what is considered a microaggression. Saying to someone that you believe America is the land of opportunity is a microaggression because they may have had a completely different experience and they don't believe that America is the land of opportunity. But is that a crisis, really, to be around people that have different experiences and different belief systems than you? Or is part of becoming a strong, powerful, independent adult learning how to have a relationship with people who are completely different than you? Another new term is safe spaces. Again, that term calls to mind that people are in crisis because they're in spaces that aren't safe. But if you look into what a safe space is, it's not a place where there's no gunfire or no bombs or no bullies threatening to beat people up. A safe space is where you're with people just like you and you don't have to deal with people who are different. And again, is that a crisis? Or is that a problem? Two of the most nefarious terms that are being used are misinformation and disinformation, both of which are used to give the idea that there is some catastrophic crisis going on that we need to be rescued from. But when you break it down, what misinformation and disinformation mean is some people are wrong and some people are lying. Now, is that a crisis or is that the way the world has always been? Has it always been the responsibility of strong, powerful individuals to listen to a wide variety of opinions and figure out who is right and who is wrong? Has it always been the responsibility of strong, powerful adults to figure out who is lying to me and I'm going to stop listening to them and who can I count on to tell the truth? And there are rescuer bullies who are presenting this idea that you and I are too naive and unintelligent to decide for ourselves what we believe is true and who we believe is telling the truth and who is lying. And catastrophe will happen unless we give them our power to decide who is telling the truth and who is lying. The third step in the rescuer bully's playbook is once you have identified a person or a group as the villain, is to attack and bully into silence anyone who stands up for this person or group. We saw this in the anti-police protests after the death of George Floyd, where there were a lot of people who came forward and said, listen, you're villainizing police as a whole. You're villainizing a lot of people who are good and brave, sacrificial, and even heroic. And the response to that was more shame, right? You're just as bad as the police. You're a part of the problem. You're just like the people who supported Jim Crow and slavery. You are on the wrong side of history, and that can be a very compelling bullying strategy, particularly when it's come with this idea that we're just tired of racist police attitudes ending up in the death of black men. But here's the problem. In 2016, long before the police protests that came after the death of George Floyd, Harvard economist Roland Fryer released the results of an extensive research that he did into police brutality. And there were two significant results of that research. And by his own admission, he grew up in the South. He did not like the police, and he thought this was going to be a slam dunk research project that would clearly show racial bias among the police when it came to the use of lethal force. So we gathered millions and millions of data points in 16 different cities and was surprised to discover that the research showed absolutely no racial bias in the police use of lethal force. And what happened when he released this research is somewhat surprising, but not surprising at all if you understand the third step in the rescuer bully's playbook is to bully and silence anyone who stands up for the person you've identified as the villain. And so the result when he released this research is that he himself was bullied by the defund the police crowd and needed police protection. And what makes this even more egregious is the second significant discovery of Dr. Fryer's research, which has to do with the non-lethal use of force by police, situations where someone may be thrown up against a car or thrown to the ground. And what he discovered was in situations where the person had committed no crime and was fully compliant, and by the way, this is by the police's own reporting, this isn't someone else reporting, by the police's own reporting of the incidences, in situations where someone had committed no crime and was fully complying, wasn't resisting at all, black citizens are 25% more likely to have non-lethal force used against them. And so there is significant racial bias in the police use of non-lethal force. So here we have a situation that is entirely unacceptable, where police are guilty of unjust behavior. This isn't just shaming, they're actually guilty of doing something unjust. We're eliminating that unjust behavior could lead to a more just and peaceful society. It could lead to black citizens having a higher trust level in police, for instance, and no one is talking about it. And this again highlights the big difference between a moral prophet and a rescuer bully. Martin Luther King wrote in his letter from a Birmingham jail that there are 4 different steps that one needs to take before protesting injustice. And the very first step is do an investigation to ensure that the injustice is really happening, right? So the first question is this true? Rescuer bullies are not concerned with the question, is this accusation true? They are only concerned with the question, is this accusation useful? And it's really important to grasp how little rescuer bullies care about the truth and care about solving real problems. They are not moral prophets. The method of operation for a rescuer bully is to leverage problems to gain power and wealth for themselves. And it doesn't matter whether the problem is real or perceived. And it really doesn't matter if the problem gets better, because if the problem gets worse, they can just use that as evidence that the systemic injustice is even greater than we imagined. And so we need to give the rescuer bully even more money and more power. To understand the true nature of the rescuer bully, it's instructive to go back to one of the earliest descriptions of the rescuer triangle in the Western canon. It may actually be the earliest description, and it is certainly the most archetypal. And it's given to us by Moses in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, where Moses has already described that God has created a perfect world, and Moses takes pains to state over and over again that what God has created is good and very good, where Adam and Eve are in paradise and they have everything they could ever need. Their relationship with God is great, their relationship with each other is great, everything is wonderful, until the serpent shows up and creates a triangle in which God is the villain, Adam and Eve are victims, and the serpent is there to rescue them. And he does it the way that all rescuer bullies have always done it, is he says, the villain, in this case God, has something that you deserve, and it is unjust, and he is trying to keep it from you. The real reason God told you not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is because he knows in the day you do that, you'll be just like him. You will be just like God. And I am here to rescue you from that injustice. And this is always the message of the rescuer bully. You ought to be jealous of what someone else has. And if you go ahead and do that thing that you know is wrong, but you want to do it anyway, go ahead and eat of the fruit. Go ahead and loot that store. Go ahead and burn down that building or shoot that police officer. Go ahead and march into Israel and rape women and kill babies in their cribs, because you're not doing something wrong. You're striking a blow for justice. And it is Luciferian in every possible meaning of the word. So rescuer bullies create this world where these people are the villains, even though we can't point out a single unjust thing that they're doing. And since these people are victims, they can do any number of unjust, criminal, and even heinous things. It's critical we understand that this is the true nature of rescuer bullies, because the fourth step in their playbook, after they've unfairly demonized an entire group of people and bullied them into silence, after they have infantilized the group that they are claiming are the victims, and after they've bullied into silence anyone who stands up for the so-called villains, their fourth step is to claim the mantle of a moral prophet, to claim that they are the continuation of the civil rights movement, that if you oppose them, it's the same thing as being for Jim Crow or against the women's right to vote, that you're on the wrong side of history. And the only reason that you could be against them is because you are filled with hate towards the people that they've identified as victims. And then they use this stance to bully every segment of society. So they will bully medical associations and psychological associations, scientific associations, to use their vocabulary and terminology, their categories and their ideas. And this doesn't happen through a robust debate of new and ongoing research among the scientific community. It comes through shame and intimidation. They bully school boards and school faculty. They bully parents. They bully corporations into giving them large amounts of money and adopting their positions publicly. And we've seen over and over again, if anyone has the courage and the audacity to stand up against them, there is a specific bullying campaign to ruin that person's career and make an example of them. So I began by saying there's one thing we need to learn to see that we usually don't see, and that is when someone is pretending to be a moral prophet, but they're actually a rescuer bully. We need to learn to understand that just because there is a protest happening on campus or in front of a courthouse or in front of a business, it doesn't mean that there's something noble going on if they are doing it in the service of a rescuer bully, because that will always work against having a just, peaceful, and prosperous society. And because sometimes people who are protesting are moral prophets and sometimes they're rescuer bullies, there is something that we need to get in the habit of doing that we're not in the habit of doing. And I'm actually going to break this down into two different things, because there's something we all need to do, and there's something that some of us need to focus in on because of our personalities. So what we all need to do is, when someone is speaking out against injustice, we need to learn to ask who specifically is doing the unjust thing, what is the unjust thing that they are doing, and what is your evidence? Now, the first two questions there move us from shame to guilt and will eliminate most of the rescuer bully's power. And that second question, what is the unjust thing that they are doing, will force us to answer the question, is this really a crisis? Is this really an injustice? Or is this simply a problem that all adults need to learn to face if they're going to become strong and powerful? And that third question, what is the evidence, is absolutely critical if we are going to have a just society. We need to develop the capacity of habitually looking at both sides of an argument. What happens quite often is we have a side and we look at our own side's argument, and then we look at our own side's caricature of the other side's argument. And if we want to have a just, peaceful, and prosperous society, we need to develop the capacity to listen to people with whom we disagree for the express purpose of understanding what their position is. Proverbs 18:17 says, in a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward to cross-examine. If you're only hearing one side of an issue, it's easy to believe that your side is entirely correct, even if it is entirely wrong. And if you're part of a group that says it is dangerous to listen to the ideas of the people who disagree with you because it's some sort of gateway to extremism, then you are either part of a cult or you're following a rescuer bully, or perhaps both. A better approach would be to listen to someone else in order to understand their viewpoint so that you could repeat their viewpoint in a way that they would agree with, because that will put you in the best position to weigh the merits of both sides of the argument. One of the things we say at Heart Tools all the time is it's great to go into a conversation like this and come out thinking that you're still right. That feels good. But the real upside in life is discovering the places that you're wrong. That's where life can really grow and change and go to a whole new level. So it's always good to go into these conversations really wanting to understand both sides of the issue. If we want to have a just, peaceful, and prosperous society, we all need to get in the habit of asking these questions when someone is speaking about injustice. Who is doing the unjust thing specifically? What is the unjust thing they're doing? And what is your evidence? Now, some of us need to learn another practice because of our personality predisposes us to being manipulated by the rescuer bully, because we have a high value for helping other people out and we hate to see other people in pain. And so we need to learn to ask ourselves the question, is this really a crisis? Is this pain caused by injustice, or is this a problem? Is this a normal problem that every adult needs to learn how to deal with and overcome to become a strong, powerful adult? So is it a crisis or is it a problem? And if it's a problem, whose problem is it? And let it be their problem. The Apostle Paul put it this way in his letter to the Galatians, where he's trying to help them understand how to be a healthy community. And in chapter 6, he has a paragraph where he begins the paragraph with the phrase, bear one another's burdens. And then he ends the paragraph with the phrase, each person should carry their own load. And that word load is the word used for a pack that a soldier would wear that would have everything that he needed, all his supplies and his food and his weapons, everything he needed. And the idea is each person should carry their own pack. I shouldn't carry part of another soldier's pack. I shouldn't expect them to carry part of my pack. That's just weakening each other. And so bear one another's burdens. Help one another if there's a crisis or a trauma or an injustice happening. Otherwise, each person should solve their own problems and gain the strength and the skills and the competency that you need to be a strong adult. So if you want to help others, that's a great thing. Don't stop helping others, but make sure that either when you're helping in a crisis. For example, there are more slaves today than at any point in the history of the world. Great place to help if you want to help solve a crisis. And if you want to help with a problem, you can do that as well, as long as you don't take ownership of someone else's problem. It has to be clear that this is their problem to solve and you are helping them. So it's okay. Tutor someone in reading or in math. Purchase books for kids who don't have any books at home. But what you can't do is work harder at solving the problem than the person that you're helping with. It has to be their problem to solve. Now, before we wrap up, I think it's important to understand the really monstrous thing that's happened in our educational system over the last generation or so, starting at the university level, but working its way all the way down to the elementary through high school level, where the focus has shifted from helping kids grow on the stairway to developing the knowledge sets and the skill sets that they need to thrive in life. And the focus has shifted, in many cases with an almost missionary zeal, to indoctrinating kids into the rescuer bullies triangles. And it's a monstrous thing that we have done, because if you are in the triangle, there's only 3 seats in the triangle and you have to sit in one of them. So if you are white, or if you are male, or if you are Judeo-Christian, or if your family's wealthy, or if you're a citizen of the United States, you are shamed. You're not guilty for doing things. You are shamed for who you are, and you live in that shame day after day, year after year, and it finally gets internalized as self-hatred. And then on the other hand, if you're a victim, you are not taught that you can get on the stairway and do things and learn things and solve problems and create a life for yourself, what you're told is life is against you, you're a victim, and really the only thing you can do is join the rescuers in hating the villains. And finally, what has been modeled for them is that the path to becoming a good and virtuous and moral person is not developing your own character. It's not growing through your own struggles. It is not figuring out a way to contribute something positive to society. The path to becoming a good person is simply hating the right people. Learning how to shame the right people is enough to put you on the right side of history. And nothing could be more crippling to the soul or to society. We can continue to make advances as a more just and peaceful and prosperous society. But in order to do that, we have got to learn to recognize the rescuer bully who pretends to be a moral prophet, but really causes nothing but harm. And we need to learn to ask these questions. Who specifically is doing the unjust thing? What specifically is the behavior they're exhibiting that is unjust? And what's your evidence? This will help us recognize real injustice when it is happening and put a stop to it without giving our power to rescuer bullies. If you think these ideas will be helpful in becoming a more just, peaceful, and prosperous society, please share this video. And if you want to master the skills of loving well and building great relationships, please subscribe to our Heart Tools YouTube channel.